the U.S. does not want to be the leader. The U.S. will engage, but we are going to engage in a way that's in our interests. The rest of the world is going to have to pick up the slack. That there is no such thing, no construct as the West, led by the United States as we've been used to. Instead, it's almost every nation for itself. If you want to be in the EU, fine. If you want to be in NATO, fine. But this is what the U.S. is going to do, and we're going to chart our own course. So that the days of looking towards the United States as leading the band here, the West, if you will, or leading at NATO or whatever it might be, that's not where Donald Trump wants to be. That's not where the MAGA people want to be either.
Okay, Jim Townsend, welcome back to The World in 10. 100 days of Donald Trump. We actually had an email from you describing his tenure, the start of his second tenure, as the end of the West as we've known it since the conclusion of the Second World War. What on earth did you mean by that? And is it as entirely in the negative as it perhaps suggests it is?
Well, that's an important question, and I guess I should really try to clarify what I meant by that. It's the end of the West as we knew it from the Second World War up until maybe the 1990s, when certainly in the United States, you could detect a split, not as pronounced as today, but a split of the United States trying to figure out what does it want to do now that the Cold War is over. Are we still the policemen of the world? Are we still? How much does this liberal world order? How much does it really mean to us? What's our role in this? What's the role of Europe in this? Who's the enemy that we are linked up against? And so as you go through the various decades since that time, you began to see the U.S. struggle with this, and over time fight with this tendency to go back to the isolationist days, where we were all inwardly focused. And so what we see with Trump today isn't new with him. What we're seeing is really an acceleration of a trend line that, as I said, goes back a couple of decades, where the United States tries to figure out what role does it want to have. And right now, the MAGA crowd has taken over in terms of plotting that course. And it's a course that I never thought I would see, where we would be so divorced in a lot of ways from what we've all been building, certainly not just since World War II, but since the end of the Cold War, building out this new world order, the liberal world order, and then suddenly with this accelerant, where there are other views about that with the Trump people, and they've decided, look, we think we need to go in another direction, not where we were 1945 through 1990. We need to go in another direction, a direction that has more of U.S. interests in mind, where we're not bearing everybody's burden. And I never thought I would see that, but we are.
So in 100 days, in your mind, what has Donald Trump done? What direction is he taking the United States? And therefore, given, that the leadership of the world does remain just about intact, where is the world following? What direction are we going into?
That's a good question, and I don't have my crystal ball with me today. It's elsewhere, unfortunately. But I think that I think giving Donald Trump and the MAGA people the benefit of the doubt in terms of having a strategy, of having a map and a way forward, and something that they can explain and show us the mileposts and the end goal. I think that's given them a bit more credit than they deserve. I think instead what we are seeing is an attitude and an attitude of disruption, an attitude of being vengeful, certainly within the U.S. domestic scene, an attitude of saying we have been abused by the West and it's time things are going to change. And so there's not a strategy here as much as there is a transactional approach here. And that's not necessarily a new statement, but it's the defining feature where the U.S. policy is day to day, we're going to do what we want to do, but we're not going to do it for free. And whether it's putting tariffs on nations, whether it's telling Europe, okay, we're not going to be as involved in European defense as we once were, it's over to you. There's a lot of things where the direction we seem to be going in, as led by the United States, is a direction where the U.S. does not want to be the leader. The U.S. will engage, but we are going to engage in a way that's in our interests. The rest of the world is going to have to pick up the slack. That there is no such thing, no construct as the West, led by the United States, as we've been used to. Instead, it's almost every nation for itself. If you want to be in the EU, fine. If you want to be in NATO, fine. But this is what the U.S. is going to do, and we're going to chart our own course. So that the days of looking towards the United States as leading the band here, the West, if you will, or leading at NATO or whatever it might be, that's not where Donald Trump wants to be. That's not where the MAGA people want to be either. And so, at least for the next 4 years, I think the West, if you will be looking for a leader. Maybe it's going to be a troika of the UK and France and Germany. Maybe it's going to be China. But I think we're in this kind of free fall because we're so used to the United States leading and bearing a lot of burdens. And for the next 4 years, that is not where we're going to be. After those 4 years are over, that's going to be the question. And that will depend on U.S. politics, and it will depend on what the other nations of the world do in response to Trump. It could be 4 years from now, we'll be dealing with a very different Europe than we're dealing with now. A Europe that is still racing to improve its defense and still trying to figure out for itself the role of the EU, the role of the UK in that European context. But it's going to be a different Europe than it is today because the U.S. Dependency is being chipped away at, which it should be, and the Europe and the EU and the UK know that their destiny is in their hands now. It's not going to be something dictated by the United States or influenced by the United States, and so I think as we look 4 years from now, wherever the U.S. is, Europe could be in a different place, but we still are going to need to have a good relationship. But it's not going to be like the dependency of the past.
Look, we'll come to the future in a minute, but I want to utilize, your sort of 40 years in the industry and your historic knowledge well beyond that as well, and to ask really if what you've been talking about, this almost attitude that America has been a victim of the way that the West has played them over that time. Is there any period that you can think of where that has been the case, where perhaps America has been, I don't know, pillaged somewhat by its allies?
Well, it depends on your definition of pillage. And I mean, I would say in my time working in this industry, as you say, beginning on a professional basis in 1982, I have never felt that we were being pillaged in the sense that we were being taken advantage of, like a city state in the old days that has been overtaken by an enemy, and the soldiers are coming in through the gates and pillaging the townspeople and this type of thing because they're helpless. I have never felt it to be that way. You might talk to some MAGA people who might say that, but my experience has been that we have led the West and led it in such a way that we took on burdens that maybe should have been more properly taken on by others. There certainly is a feeling that as a leader, we have to make some sacrifices because we gain a lot of benefit from that too. And I think there was, in the end of the day, there was a recognition of that kind of benefit. In terms of whether we had bases overseas or we had allies that went with us into battle so many times. We had allies that would advise and counsel us at NATO or other places. We had trade relationships. We had cultural relationships. And the U.S. had a lot of influence. And we consumed a lot of the world's resources, too. But we were able to work all of this out and work together as the West. And so there was not to me a feeling that we were being pillaged or we were being victims, helpless victims being taken advantage of. Even in the terms of trade, I think we've all learned over the past couple of months how trading relationships are not what they seem. It's not a zero sum type of thing. Trading relationships are complex, and they reflect other things than a some type of game score where there's winners and losers, and that's not how the world works. And so people who feel that we've been taken advantage of, that we're victims of the EU, the EU is out to they're our enemy, they're out to screw us, as Trump said, that's not how things worked. And in my experience, I never really saw a period where that happened. Instead, I saw periods where we would ask allies to go to Iraq or Afghanistan or other things, and they would go. They would go, even if it was just with a squadron of planes, and they would take casualties. Even though those allies felt it was hard to explain to their people why they were doing this. I personally would go to these countries at their embassies in Washington and say, hey, we could sure use your F-16s to participate in the Libya air campaign or Kosovo air campaign during the Balkan days. I mean, there's so many times when the Allies shed blood for us, and that was not well understood in the United States. It never made the headlines in the United States. But allies, in fact, if you want to talk about people feeling victimized, after Iraq, there's some allies that came away from that going, oh my God, why did we do that? So I think, and to answer your question, I don't see us having gone through a period where we were really pillaged. We got a lot more from this than American people know we got. I know because I saw it and I felt it every day. And I mourn the time today where we don't have that kind of leadership ability and relationship with allies where I can go and say, we need F-16s to go on this mission. And the allies would say, not a problem. And instead, I think I'm going to find a place where we're going to ask for help here and there. And the allies are going to say, well, we'll have to think about it.
Okay, so that's sort of, has America been the victim? What about in these modern days, these 100 days that Donald Trump has been back in office? Do you think the West, or maybe even the whole world, has been set back more by this particular individual in these 100 days more than any other event since, say, the Second World War? Has any other individual
Absolutely.
had this sort of negative impact on the globe in that time?
Absolutely. It is absolutely unprecedented. It's been body blows. And just sticking to the West, it's been body blows as the idea of the U.S. commitment, the reliability of the United States commitment, reliability, two things that is hard to touch, but is there and is an underpinning of a relationship. Having body blows to the idea that when the U.S. makes a commitment, we stand by it, or that we are the stability that we bring. You can rely on. You can rely on the United States. You can rely on its word. Uh, the idea that can be now questioned is a huge thing. It's something that impacts everyone because a lot of nations set off on a course, whether it's their military forces or it's their foreign policy or domestically or trade. They set off on a course of action or a way of life based on a commitment made by the United States years ago that we always would stand behind, that you could rely on the U.S., and therefore you invest in dollars or you do these things. And to have that all of a sudden not just questioned, but absolutely undermined is one of the biggest things to happen since the end of World War II. 1949, we set up NATO, and that was the first time where the United States came out of its isolationist shell, if you will, and made commitments to other nations. And that held up until Donald Trump. who came in and said it's his first statement was something along the lines of, "If we're not going to protect you if you don't pay up," and suddenly it became a protection racket instead of a holy commitment made by generations of Americans, generations of Americans leadership through a lot of hard times since 1949. And here you have someone who comes in and undercuts that within the 100 days, even before the 100 days. And so it's something that I don't think I ever thought I would see, and it's something that I'm not sure how you recover from that. How do you recover trust? How do you recover from having people not trust you anymore in the kind of game that we play? Diplomacy, international relations, military relationships. It's built on trust. We've got your back. We've got your back. Can you believe? Do you have faith in that? If an American says, "I have your back," maybe that American has your back until the next election. So this is an unprecedented time, and I don't know where this goes.
I mean, I take the point you're making, but I think of, let's take an example, say the Five Eyes, so the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK. Surely there are relationships there built on the trust that you're saying has been eroded by Donald Trump, but that is over sort of more than 80 years of work together, and these are individuals working within various bodies, not just Five Eyes, but NATO and various others, the European Union, whatever it might be. All these bodies feel to me like they're based far more than on just who is the leader of the United States and what are the politics of the United States. Don't these bodies, with all that history and most importantly the interpersonal relationships within them, don't they ensure that the West endures no matter what, really?
Well, I agree with that picture that you're drawing. The foundation and the structure of the West built over those years based on those personal contacts that you're talking about. And there's an array of them in different ways between the United States and the peoples of Europe, as expressed in the institutions, this type of thing, is very solid. Um, so I agree with that picture. But I think what we've seen is, it's like a castle. Being from the UK, you know something about castles, and with a castle, if you get a piece of artillery and you fire enough cannonballs into those walls start to crumble. At least it shakes up the masonry inside of that castle. What we're seeing right now for the first time is a lot of cannonballs smacking into that castle that have never been fired before from the direction from which they're being fired. And so that structure right now is being shaken. And so that's for sure, but it hasn't tumbled. You're absolutely right. But I think what we're talking about here are not necessarily cannonballs going up against the castle, as much as termites that have gotten into the wooden superstructure of that castle. And these termites are undermining those structures of that castle. So even those cannonballs that are being fired are smacking into that wall, over time there has also been termites, and a lot of the wooden superstructure has been eaten away. So that those institutions, or the West, if you will, that castle, is being able to sustain some of these body blows. But I just don't know how long it's going to be able to sustain it, given the superstructure that has been undermined and eaten away by Trump. He doesn't just fire cannonballs. I mean, he also undermines that very foundation because of the eating away at trust. That's what the termites go after. It's trust. It's reliability. It's commitment. It's honor. We honor our word. It's those things that you don't see because it's the structure. You see the walls getting pounded, but you don't see that superstructure. And that's where the termites have done their work. And that means that wall is not as strong as it used to be. And that's what I worry about.
You've spoken about America sort of no longer being the world leader. Do you think, therefore, there is currently a sort of unprecedented opportunity for another nation, for someone else to actually take that position? Or was it almost unique after the Second World War that there was the chance for a country to become a singular power in the way that the United States has done? Is this
Well,
going to be
absolutely.
a different type of leader if one emerges?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say, yes, 1945 was absolutely unique for the United States to fill a vacuum because you had many of the nations of the West that had been leaders, like UK, France, Germany, just either laying in total destruction, the way Germany was, or recovering from the cost that war brought to the UK and to France. You had the U.S. stepping in unscathed, if you will, in terms of its territory, and also being a nuclear power and having a roaring economy coming out of that war, recovering from the Depression. So we were a unique country at the time, at a unique period where we were able to fill vacuums only opposed by the Soviet Union. And so there you had the battle line being drawn for the Cold War. But in terms of the West, we were the undisputed leader. And as far as the nations of the West, that was okay having the U.S. in there. And I think the U.S. was there certainly and with all good intentions, helping to build the UN and Bretton Woods and all those things that we know from Cold War history that we did. Today, the U.S. is not that leader that we were, at least for the next 4 years. And even when a U.S. president comes back, if it's a Democrat, they're not going to come back in the same way that it was in those old days. I'm afraid those old days are finished. But your point about, so what does your leadership look like now if it's not the United States? Is this a unique opportunity for someone else? I would say there's a couple things. It is a unique opportunity, certainly for China. They have been given incredible gifts by what the U.S. has been doing. So certainly they see that this is their time to fill the gaps left by a retreating United States. But there's another grouping that this time has come, and that's the European Union. And I throw the UK in with that. I know you're not in the EU. I got that. But I think Europe has an opportunity, given the leadership in the EU, van der Leyen, Kallas, Keir Starmer, Macron, Merz. There is and then Poland as well. I think there is a unique opportunity now for Europe to really, if it plays its cards right and doesn't get bogged down in the bureaucracy of it, they can become a very important force in the West, if not help lead in the West, whether it's the EU as an institution or the national members like Macron or Keir Starmer or whatever. There's an opportunity and a need for these for the institution, the EU, as well as the nations themselves, to rise to this occasion. I mean, right now they got to decide what to do about Ukraine, because I think the U.S. is going to walk away, and we're going to leave Ukraine in the laps of Europe, and Europe's got some big decisions to make. Europe's got big decisions to make in dealing with an aggressive Russia that is going into hyperdrive now, helped by the U.S. If we do business with Russia, we're going to be fueling this militarization. So Europe has a huge challenge right now, but they've got strong leadership. I think there is money certainly within the European Union. The Brits always rise to the challenge. I have great faith in the UK stepping up and working with the EU on this as well, to fill the vacuum left by the United States, or at least to hold the fort until the U.S. can come back in some iteration. But as I said, if and when we come back, it will be in a different world. When it comes to Europe, it'll be in a different world when it comes to our own politics, and it'll be in a different world when it comes to how nations look on us as a player. Looking on us with a little bit of doubt, a little bit of apprehension, because we're not the U.S. that we used to be.
I mean, we're doing this after 100 days of Donald Trump. I've done a tiny bit of mental maths. You know, that the 4-year term is about 14 to 15 times 100 days, isn't it? On that basis, you know, can you imagine what more he can change? Or is he now, has he damaged the US's standing to such a degree in 100 days that actually his impact on the globe could actually only diminish in the next sort of 14 lots of 100 days, as it were?
One can hope. A lot will depend on the midterm elections, and therefore, will the Democrats come in and control the House or the Senate? That can act as a brake on him. It depends on the judicial branch, and if they are able to corral him legally in terms of these executive decisions that he makes, these executive orders that he signs, which are not law. Are they unconstitutional? So there's a lot of court cases ahead that will define how well the U.S. Judicial side can corral what Trump is doing. um, uh, the nations themselves in the West, and how they now stand up to him together. How the American academic institutions like Harvard and Columbia stand up. There's a lot of actions ahead, decisions to be made, that will tell us if he will be diminished or not in the next 100 days. The thing about this 100 days is he came out of the blocks really fast. Unlike his earlier term and unlike other presidential terms, he came out in a flurry of directives every day. He had a playbook. He had people who knew what they were doing helping to implement that. He had these things already written and people ready to go in, loyalists who will do just what he says. So he learned a lot from the failures of that first term. And he made sure in this second term he was not going to fall victim of people who weren't going to do what he wanted done. So this 100 days is unique in a lot of ways, and he caught everyone flat-footed. The Democrats, the blob, as we're called, the people on the outside of the government in Washington, the pontificate. All of us, the media, were caught flat-footed, unawares, and scrambling to figure out how do you stop him. The resistance is beginning to get some traction now. And we'll have to see over the next few years if everyone is successful in doing their jobs, like the checks and balances between from the Capitol Hill and the judicial side, the Supreme Court, and there's checks and balances we have that have been off kilter because of various reasons. If we can get checks and balances back into play, that will answer your question about will he diminish over time. There's plenty he could still do. Plenty of things that will come his way that we don't even know about now that he might take advantage of. But if we are able to get the United States government back into balance, that will decide how much more damage he can do.
And I've just got one final one for you, Jim. And I can't lie, I'm furious with you not for not bringing your crystal ball, because you've referred repeatedly to we can't truly understand what might happen in 4 years' time. Can it effectively be reversed immediately? But I do wonder, the impact of the Second World War and the outcomes from it. The positives that we did create from it, have endured for call it to the 90s, as you mentioned. Maybe we're still feeling a lot of positives even now, despite certain parts of what's going on in Europe. Do you think that there will inevitably, even if a lot of it is reversible in 4 years' time, be an impact for the next 50, 60 years by what Donald Trump has done and is likely to do over the next 4 years? Or can an entire presidency be reversed immediately by someone who thinks essentially the polar opposite of his predecessor?
I think that will not happen. It will not be reversed. After 4 years, whoever comes into power will have a new world, a new landscape that has been formed by reactions to Trump. So that new person is going to deal with a new world for sure. New relationships, new views of held by others about the United States. And there's going to be some good from this too. There'll be some good and there's going to be some bad. The good is the West probably needed a good scrubbing. And maybe the Washington D.C. power center needed a good scrubbing too. It's getting it now, but I think a good thing that has come out of this, the scrubbing, the destruction of the castle, if you will, the termites, the all of that. I think it is probably the best thing that has ever happened to Europe, because this gets Europe to break that dependency on the United States. It gets Europe to scrub itself, not just in terms of defense spending, but how does Europe, whether it's the EU or it's just Europe as a continent, the nations of Europe, UK, how the scrubbing that will happen over the next 4 years will result in a future European Union and a future Europe that is probably making more progress in terms of high tech, because you can't depend on the United States to provide it, and that through all the various trade issues and problems that are coming up, that Europe has got to get its act together on, whether it's tech, whether it is defense and military, whether it is leadership in terms of how does Europe lead, the role of leadership of Europe. In other words, people call Europe a vassal of the United States. That's a bit harsh, but I think certainly the Europe growing up under the shadow of the U.S. oak tree, if you will, for 80 years, with that shadow now being withdrawn, that oak tree walking away, this is what Europe needs to get its act together across a broad front, and that includes the UK too. And again, it's not just defense and military. It's all kinds of things. It's economic, it's trade, it is culture. I mean, you name it. Things have been stunted by growing up in that shadow. And there's a confidence that Europe, I think, is starting to gain. There's this always bothered me. European nations or the EU. Oh, we can't do that. That's only something the U.S. can do. Oh, we can't. That's beyond us. I was so tired of hearing that. If Europe can emerge from these 4 years just with a growth in confidence, understanding that there's a hell of a lot Europe can do when it gets its act together and moves in a direction. And this is the UK too. And I think what Trump has done is forced Europe to do this. It's forced Europe to get traction on things that should have been doing maybe 20 or 30 years ago. There's got to be a balance between the welfare state and defense. There's got to be more effort being put into competition, and you hear this. I hear this here in France. There's a great effort to try to get much more done on the tech side, and throughout Europe. I mean, to cease regulating everything, and instead try to take forward motion and actually innovating and doing things. I think this is going to happen, and I think it's going to happen quicker because the United States is not going to be there holding you back. The U.S. does that, and European nations in the past have allowed that, has let that happen, because it gave Europe the ability to just, kind of outsource the United States things like defense. But now Europe is going to be forced to face, life without the U.S. And I think that's going to be the best thing that's ever happened to Europe. It's going to take a long time, and it's not going to be fun. But I think it's got to be done, and it's going to be a great benefit to this period.